It happened at the end of the last century in an old house. On the night of Friday the 13th, the 90-year-old woman died in terrible agony. She bequeathed her house to her 20-year-old great-granddaughter on the condition that she would accept her abilities. Soon after her great-grandmother's death, the young heiress and her family moved into the house. After moving in, the granddaughter never accepted the witch's powers. On the 40th day after the witch's death, tragedy struck. One day, a neighbor who lived across the street came to meet her new neighbors. She knocked for a long time, but no one opened the door. As soon as the woman was about to leave, the door opened. She entered, but there was no one in the house. This repeated for several days. The neighbor realized the family was missing. The disappearance of the family forced the whole village to go looking for them. But after a week of fruitless searches, people decided to stop. The neighbor couldn't sleep all night. In the silence of the night, she heard strange sounds. The woman went to the window and saw an incomprehensible silhouette climbing into the house of the missing family. The frightened neighbor ran outside. A strange figure flew out of the window. Shocked, the woman ran into the empty house. Upon entering, she saw 3 horribly mangled corpses. All 3 husband, wife, granddaughter, child had their eyes gouged out, and on all the mirrors hanging in the house, the name of the great-grandmother was written in blood. The whole family was buried together. After the funeral, the neighbor went into the ominous house out of habit. She again saw that unfortunate silhouette, which stared at her. People heard heartbreaking screams from that house, but no one dared to go there. The woman was never seen again. Lily was an ordinary 16-year-old girl who was always skeptical of creepy stories. One night, after getting seriously drunk, her friend Kate suggested they summon the Queen of Spades. Lily agreed to help Kate, just to prove that it was all nonsense. After sitting in front of the mirror for about 20 minutes, they decided to go to bed. It was late, and every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the night. About an hour later, Lily was still unable to fall asleep. She suddenly heard a rustling noise coming from the bathroom. At first, she thought it might be Kate, but then realized her friend was sleeping beside her. Who could it be? Lily got up and headed to the bathroom to wash her face. As she walked, she heard someone following her, as if they were crawling behind her. The story continues from Kate's perspective. I woke up to Lily screaming in the bathroom. I immediately rushed over to see what was happening. What I saw left me in shock. My friend Lily was sitting on the sink, sobbing uncontrollably. But when she lifted her head, I realized it wasn't Lily. Her face was covered in corpse worms, and her eye sockets were empty. She raised her hand, or what was left of it, and growled something incoherent. I bolted out of the house and ran to a nearby bar. There I drank another liter of beer and eventually passed out. When I woke up in the morning, my head was pounding. As I wandered through the empty bar, I realized everyone was gone. This was odd, as the bar was open 24/7. Looking up, I saw 20 to 30 corpses hanging from the ceiling, and something was moving among them. To my horror, I recognized it. It was Lily. The next day, Kate was found among 50 other mutilated bodies and taken to the morgue. We lived in a duplex house, sharing a thin brick wall with our neighbors. The family next door had once been large and lively, but over time they dispersed, leaving only the elderly Irina Ivanovna. After the untimely death of her son, she had become somewhat unhinged. She didn't babble incoherently and managed to take care of herself, but the agony she must have felt manifested in loud, continuous groans that penetrated our shared wall. It was a terrible thing to admit, but we had grown accustomed to the sound, noticeable only in complete silence. Tragically, Irina Ivanovna met a grim end. Unable to cope with her sorrow, she hanged herself, not in the conventional sense of hanging, which implies a leap from somewhere high, a desperate last-minute fear of wanting to live. No, she strangled herself. She tied a rope to the radiator and could have stopped the suffocation at any moment, but her revulsion for life was so strong that she chose not to. And so she strangled herself on the radiator, and we buried her. 3 or 4 days later, while lying alone on the couch with a book, I heard her moan. At first, I wasn't scared, having forgotten that the old neighbor had died. But then, I remembered, it felt like plunging into icy, burning cold water. I wanted to scream, but my chest was compressed, unable to produce a sound or even a breath. My limbs moved sluggishly, as if submerged in water, and a murky green haze clouded my vision. I got up and left the house, heading to my grandmother's nearby. The icy water feeling receded, and I began to think rationally, chalking it up to nerves. I was 15, a sensitive soul. Nowadays, it takes a lot more to unsettle me. But then, a day later, my father, a man not prone to nervousness or mysticism, ran out of the house wearing only one slipper. He had heard it too. The events that followed are hazy. We invited a priest to bless the house, and someone else, perhaps a bioenergetic healer, was also called in. I spent nearly a year living with my grandmother. Eventually, Irina Ivanovna's spirit was finally put to rest, yet she still appears to me in dreams, always before an illness or misfortune. The last time was in April. I was lying in bed when, in a half-dream state, I saw her peeking into my room, not her whole body, just her head, hanging from a long blue neck. And indeed, everything went terribly wrong after that. Our friend Vera had always dreamed of living in her own house, and one day her husband made that dream a reality. They moved into a prestigious suburban estate, complete with a spacious lot, designer interiors, and all new furnishings exuding bourgeois luxury. But despite the ideal setting, something was amiss. According to Vera, the house felt wrong. At night, the curtains moved as if stirred by a draft. The temperature would suddenly drop. Despite the boiler working overtime in the basement, an inexplicable dread would descend. Vera's 2 pit bulls, usually fearless, whimpered like puppies and insisted on sleeping in the child's room. That room was the only place where it felt calm. Eventually, Vera started sleeping there too, along with the dogs. Even her husband, a pragmatic man who didn't believe in such nonsense, ended up on Vasya's carpet one night. He had been tormented by a white cat that would visit him, sitting on his chest and grooming itself, making him feel suffocated and terrified. Finally, the family decided to spend a month or 2 in Europe, leaving Vera's husband's son from his first marriage to house sit. The boy, who thrived on endless partying, immediately invited his friends over for a multi-day bash. However, the revelry abruptly ended the next morning. The boy and his friends fled the house, jumping into their cars and driving away, terror-stricken. They spoke of a white cat, but what could frighten a group of 20-year-olds about a mere cat? The whole situation was shrouded in mystery. Various religious figures were called in to cleanse the house, but to no avail. Vera's husband, a determined and influential man, was resolved to get to the bottom of it. While the ultimate truth remained elusive, a plausible explanation emerged. A construction crew had been building the house when one worker fell ill and died. With no documents or known relatives, he was quietly buried on the property. Where exactly? No one remembered. It had happened at night. The owner dug up the yard, hoping to find the remains and return them to the workers' homeland, but found nothing. It's possible the crew buried him in the foundation, Or perhaps they had fabricated the whole story out of spite. In the end, the house had to be sold. Vera mourned as if for a lost loved one, and indeed, she was grieving for the dead man too. She couldn't take any of the designer furnishings to their city apartment and gave away various items to friends. I didn't have much space either, but I accepted the dining room curtains' luxurious, purple taffeta. They hung for a while, but soon I found them unsettling. They would sway at odd times, and shadows seemed to flicker behind them. In the end, I threw them out. The house remains empty. I don't know who bought it or what became of it. But the white cat still haunts my thoughts. Who was she?